Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to take a really focused look at one of the most studied figures in history, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. And we're analyzing this through a pretty unique stack of sources, specifically the insights and addresses of Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad.
That's exactly right. And, for listeners who might know the basic historical facts.
The timeline, the events.
Right, the timeline. But maybe they're less familiar with this specific analytical lens. The approach of the Caliphate is just so critical here.
How so?
It moves beyond just, reciting history. It synthesizes the narrative into what you could call a practical moral curriculum. The sources consistently argue that the Prophet's life is the ultimate human blueprint.
A practical manifestation of that title, Mercy to the Worlds.
Precisely.
So our goal isn't just to recount events, it's to find those specific moments that really illuminate his core character. We're talking about forgiveness, justice, and this transformative power of education. We need to see these things in action.
Exactly. And that foundation for all these principles, it really begins at the earliest possible stage.
Okay, let's unpack this journey then. Starting right at the beginning. He was born in Mecca around 570 CE into the Quraysh tribe. But his childhood, it was marked by intense vulnerability.
It was a very challenging start. I mean, his father died before he was born, and his mother passed away when he was only 6 years old.
Wow.
And the sources draw our attention to this period because it highlights something crucial for his future leadership. Being raised first by his wet nurse, Alima Dia, out in the desert.
So he had that intimate knowledge of Bedouin life.
He did, and then later by his grandfather and his uncle, Abu Talib. All of this, it prepared him.
Prepared him in what way? I mean, how did that unconventional, challenging upbringing serve as preparation, according to this analysis?
It wasn't just about hardship. It was about exposure. It gave him this incredible ability to sympathize, deeply with orphans and widows and to relate genuinely to all strata of Arabian society.
From merchants to the desert tribes.
Exactly. And that experience, it fostered the universal compassion that would later define his entire statecraft.
And this personal integrity it was visible right away in his public life. Before he was a prophet, while working as a merchant, he earned the titles Al-Amin, the trustworthy, and Al-Adiq, the truthful. In a society where your word was everything, but corruption was also everywhere, how significant was that kind of reputation?
It was economically vital. Commerce relied entirely on reputation. For one person to be so universally trusted, even across these fiercely competing tribes, it meant his integrity was just flawless.
Yeah.
And Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad often points this out, that this pre-prophetic life proved his moral excellence was innate. It wasn't dependent on divine revelation. His word alone was enough to settle disputes. He was trusted even by people who would later become his fiercest enemies.
And it's this trust that led to his partnership with Khadija.
Yes. She was 15 years his senior. A wealthy, highly respected widow. He married her around 595 CE.
And the sources really emphasize this was a union of deep mutual respect and affection.
Absolutely. Not just some transactional marriage. She provided emotional support, yes, but also the socioeconomic stability that gave him the space for contemplation. When the world was changing around him, she was his first and most steadfast believer, a crucial anchor for the struggles to come.
And that transition point, the call to prophecy, that happens in 610 CE. At age 40, he receives the first revelation in the cave of Hira, and the next 13 years in Mecca were, a crucible. What was the core message, and what was the response he faced?
The message was pure monotheism and moral reform, basically. Have faith in God and do good. But the response from the Meccan elite, the Quraysh, was just vicious. This period is the ultimate lesson in steadfastness.
Right.
The sources emphasize the sheer patience it took to face relentless mockery, social exclusion, physical threats for over a decade.
It wasn't just verbal opposition either. I remember the sources detailing the economic pressure.
Absolutely. The persecution intensified to a full economic and social boycott of his entire clan, the Banu Hashim. For 3 years, they were forced into a desolate ravine, Shib Abi Talib, cut off from all food and trade.
So they were enduring extreme hunger or suffering.
Yes, and to lead a community through that kind of calculated, dehumanizing pressure, and to still insist on non-retaliation, that is a profound testament to principled leadership.
And then came 619 CE, the year of sorrow. That must have been just shattering, losing both Khadija and his protective uncle, Abu Alub.
He lost his emotional support and his tribal protection almost at the same time.
Yeah.
And in the tribal structure of Mecca, losing Abu-Lib meant losing your physical security overnight. But what the Khilafat's analysis focuses on here is the immediate strategic pivot he makes.
Instead of despair.
Instead of despair, he turns completely to prayer. And at the same time, he starts searching for a new physical and political home.
And that's where the pledges of Aleppo come in, securing the allegiance of these groups from Yathrib, which would later become Medina between 620 and 620.
It shows remarkable foresight. While he's facing this intense personal grief and escalating threats, he's also engaged in careful statecraft. He's preparing the ground for this massive strategic relocation.
The migration, the Hijra, to Medina in 622 CE.
Exactly. And this wasn't a desperate flight. It was a meticulous, high-risk operational move, including the clever tactic of taking refuge in the Cave of Thar with Abu Bakr. It was the transition from a persecuted spiritual community to a fully functioning state.
Once in Medina, the transformation was, you're right, immediate. He establishes the mosque, the market, this system of brotherhood between the Meccan migrants and the Medinan helpers. But the most important document to come out of this was the Constitution of Medina.
This is a centerpiece of the analysis from Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad. The Constitution of Medina It was truly revolutionary for the 7th century. It created a political document guaranteeing religious freedom and security for all the communities there.
For everyone, Muslims, Jews, pagans.
For everyone, all under the Prophet's supreme leadership.
Given the intense tribal pressures in Arabia, the historical enmity, how revolutionary was it, practically speaking, for this constitution to prioritize religious liberty over just tribal loyalty?
It completely inverted the traditional Arabian social order. It established citizenship based on geography and agreed-upon justice, replacing the whole blood feud system.
Wow.
It decreed that all groups were responsible for common defense and welfare. It modeled governance on consultation, shura, and compassion. It ensured his leadership wasn't autocratic, but advisory and just. It set the highest standard for social harmony.
And that standard of justice became even more visible when external threats forced this new state into defensive conflict.
Right.
Which brings us to the Battle of Badr in 624 CE, where this small Muslim force achieved a miraculous victory over the Quraysh.
And the aftermath of Badr gives us one of the most powerful aha moments emphasized in the sources about the Prophet's character. Typically, the spoils of war were material and captives. They were held for huge ransoms or, worse, executed.
So what was the Prophet's directive for the literate Quraysh captives?
This is where his value for education just completely transcends any desire for vengeance.
Or even for wealth.
He offered this just an extraordinary form of mercy. He said any captive who could teach 10 Muslim children or adults to read and write would be released. Their literacy. That became their ransom.
So he effectively turned the spoils of war into a social benefit.
Precisely. The analysis stresses that those who had themselves shown no mercy towards the Muslims were treated with compassion and consideration and utilized as teachers.
That's incredible.
Think about the power dynamic. He took individuals who had tried to destroy his community and commanded them to intellectually empower that same community. It just elevated learning above all other forms of compensation. It sets an incredibly high moral benchmark for post-conflict resolution.
And that focus on mercy and resilience continued. We see it at Uhud, where despite being injured and facing setbacks, he forgave the companions who disobeyed commands. And then there's the brilliant strategic wisdom at the Battle of the Trench in 627 CE, using that Persian tactic of a trench to nullify the Meccan siege.
And in every single instance, the sources draw attention to the firmness in principle, defending the community, but coupling it with an absolute insistence on honorable conduct. No looting, no abuse of non-combatants.
Okay, let's move to a crucial turning point, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah in 628 CE. The terms of this treaty were, on the surface, incredibly unfavorable to the Muslims.
They were devastating to them.
They were prevented from performing their pilgrimage. They had to agree to return any Quraysh convert who fled to Medina. The companions were furious.
They saw it as a profound humiliation, but the Prophet, with this unwavering foresight and patience, declared the pact a clear victory, and the analysis from Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad shows why. That agreement, despite the immediate disappointment, it was strategically vital. It secured a 10-year truce. And that allowed Islam to spread through diplomacy and intellectual persuasion, not military conflict. It showed that long-term strategic peace trumps short-term emotional victories.
And that wisdom was vindicated just 2 years later. The Quraysh violated the treaty, leading to the peaceful but dramatic conquest of Mecca in 630 CE.
Yes.
The Prophet marches in with the 10,000 Muslims, but this was a victory sealed by temperament, not tanks.
It was the defining moment of his career as a moral exemplar. The fear among the Meccans, who had persecuted him and his followers for 20 years, it must have been immense. Vengeance was the tradition.
And
Instead, he declared a general, sweeping amnesty for virtually all of his former enemies, forgiving even his longtime personal persecutors.
he entered a city that tried to destroy him, cleansed the Kaaba of idols, restored it to monotheistic worship, and delivered an address rooted in forgiveness. The Caliphate's perspective underscores this was a moral victory, not a physical conquest.
Exactly. He combined absolute, uncompromising firmness in spiritual principle, the removal of idol worship, with boundless compassion for the human beings who had opposed him. It was physical proof of the Quranic teaching that good and evil are not equal, and that forgiveness is superior.
We see that same emphasis on justice and restraint in the final large-scale expedition to Tabuk, also in 630 CE.
We do. Despite significant rumors of a major Byzantine invasion, the Prophet chose diplomacy and restraint over aggression. He led a large army north, but instead of fighting, he negotiated treaties with local Christian and Jewish tribes.
Guaranteeing their peace and religious freedom.
Yes, in exchange for security commitments. It just confirmed his governance was based on universal justice and coexistence, not just for Muslims.
Okay, so let's move to the culmination of his mission, the farewell pilgrimage in 632 CE. The last sermon serves as his final, definitive moral instruction to humanity.
It's really the summary of his life's work. The sermon focused so heavily on human rights and equality. He abolished all racial, national, and class-based distinctions, declaring explicitly that no Arab has superiority over a non-Arab, nor a white person over a black person, except by virtue of piety.
So this is where we need to synthesize those core moral qualities that Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad consistently highlights. Let's look at those 4 essential virtues.
Okay, first, truthfulness and integrity. It starts with his title, Al-Alamin, and is echoed right there in the sermon, where he warned that among the gravest of sins is a lying tongue. His life shows a relentless adherence to truth in all dealings, personal, commercial, and political.
Second, mercy and forgiveness. We saw this so clearly at the conquest of Mecca, but the sources also point to his actions at Tabuk. Even when plots against him were uncovered, he refused to retaliate or punish them.
And the key here is consistency. Mercy wasn't a tactic you use when you're strong. It was a defining characteristic, applied even when severe retaliation was, completely justified.
Okay, and the third.
Selflessness and sacrifice. The sacrifices of the companions, who risked everything during the Hijrah at Badr, in the trials of Tabuk, that was just a mirror of the Prophet's own total selflessness. He sought no personal gain, only the welfare of his community and the establishment of justice.
And finally, the overarching value that ties all these principles into a universal movement.
Universal love and brotherhood. That's the culmination. It's epitomized by the teaching to love for others what you love for yourself. The Constitution of Medina laid the legal groundwork for this, and the farewell sermon codified it as a religious and moral imperative for all Muslims. His life demonstrates that these virtues are achievable, they're practical, and they're necessary for successful statecraft.
This has been an incredibly thorough deep dive into that historical narrative. But through this very specific lens of moral analysis, we've traced his journey from the integrity of an orphaned boy to the leader who established a just state and won his greatest victory through compassion and forgiveness.
And the power of this specific analysis is that it constantly ties those sweeping historical moments, the hardship of Mecca, the founding of Medina, the triumph at Mecca, to these timeless, applicable lessons on justice, selflessness, and the pursuit of knowledge. His life is presented as the ultimate, actionable guide for anyone seeking to embody virtue.
And as we conclude, I just want to go back to that astounding decision after the Battle of Badr. The Prophet's use of war captives as educators, commanding intellectual contribution rather than material ransom or physical revenge, it just sets a phenomenal standard. And it makes you ask, how might modern international relations and post-conflict resolution look, not just in terms of treaties, but in practical human exchange? If education and compassion were the primary currencies, if we transform former enemies into intellectual partners, accelerating global learning rather than perpetuating these cycles of violence.
A standard that transformed conflict into a lasting intellectual peace.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.